Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who is on tonight. It's always great to see everyone's beautiful faces. So, and y'all could be anywhere at 9 o'clock Eastern time, 8 o'clock Central time, and y'all are here with us. So thank you so much. So now I'll read Ms. Luana's amazing bio, and then after that, she'll start her presentation. A native-born New Yorker, Luana M. Graves Sellars quickly discovered that weather-wise, she was really a misplaced Floridian. Even with her degree in journalism and Black history, she wasn't yet prepared to live on Hilton Head Island, one of the most culturally rich and historic areas of the South. But a passion for her Gullah Geechee roots led her to become a cultural influencer and a preservationist through her writing, which is focused on educating others as well as documenting Gullah culture, its history, and people. In 2021, she started the company Sankofa Communications, expanding into visual media by creating, writing, directing, and producing long and short cultural videos and documentaries. The founder of the nonprofits Lowcountry Gullah and the LowcountryGullah Foundation, Luana is also a keynote speaker and community activist who is doing her part to sustain and preserve Gullah Geechee culture for future generations. Sellers notes, a greater sense of self begins with my own personal journey and uncovering that not only am I a Gullah and the cultural grounding that's associated, as well as the genealogy research that led to the discovery and the incredible yet unexpected connections that unfolded along the way. As I said, amazing biography. So, Ms. Luana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's I know everything that's in that bio because obviously I wrote it, but sometimes it's fascinating to hear about the things that I have been able to accomplish. But what I have started to realize and highlight when I speak is that, of course, I'm proud of the work that I'm done and am doing, but the thing that I am most proud of is the fact that I am the descendant of Catherine and George Ward, who were enslaved on a rice plantation in Georgetown, South Carolina, as well as Caesar Ravenel, who was also enslaved and went on to fight in the U.S. colored troops as one of those people who was fighting for our freedom. And knowing or learning, I should say, learning about my culture and everything that comes along with that is something that I have only learned within the last less than 10 years. I grew up in New York. I had two aunts who were born, my grandmother and her two sisters, who were born in Charleston, but they lived in and grew up in New York. And my aunts would always say that they were Geechees, but they never said what a Geechee was. I grew up with rice on the table, okra, and even found a bottle tree in my grandmother's house that she didn't even know was a bottle tree that her sister had given her. So my culture was always around me, but until I started doing the writing, the freelance writing that I was doing, and the work on the culture, that someone said, "When are you going to do your own story?" And that's when I started to dig deeper into finding out exactly who I am and where I came from. Through the work that I've been doing, I was able to I was fortunate enough to do an interview with someone at Brook Green Gardens. And it was when I was at Brook Green Gardens and finished with the interview, and we were just kind of walking around the area that I found not only the enslaver of Catherine and George Ward, Joshua John Ward was his name, but also realized, like a freight train hitting me in the face that I was suddenly standing on the grounds of where my family was enslaved. And so that has just completely, as I say, taken me down a rabbit hole of further discovery and learning about my culture and the life that they experienced in growing rice. Um, I'm sure that most of you know that the Gullah Geechee are the direct descendants of West African enslaved people. What you might not know is they were the best of the best of the best that Africa had to offer. And they were the best because they were skilled in growing rice. They were very knowledgeable about the technology that went into growing rice. And they were specifically selected so that they could um, uh, pick up where the colonists had failed in growing rice. And so that's the foundation of a lot of Gullah Geechee. There were about 10 countries from Nigeria all the way down to Angola that Gullah Geechee people came from. And through my work and my research, I have found that Nigeria is the greatest part of my DNA, but also Ghana and Senegal are also significant parts of my DNA, as well as been able to go down as far as the different tribes that I'm connected with. So I'm telling you all of this to say that this was what I do, the documentaries that I do, the articles, the podcast, all of that is really what has become my journey of discovery for myself. And I found that a lot of people, like everyone here tonight, has also been looking to find out who we are and where we come from. And so I very early on decided to share my journey of discovery with other people because I have found that enslaved people or the descendants of those enslaved people were all like orphans, looking for the parents, the DNA, the connections to who we are and where we came from and what we are made of. And so that to me is an important story. You know, I in my childhood, I knew that I was a Seminole as well. I didn't know how or what, but again, through my research, I have found that not only were the Seminoles here in South Carolina and then moved to Florida, and y'all probably know the story better than I do, but been able to identify some of the other tribes that I'm connected to, like the Creeks and the Yamasee tribes. So to me, all of those things are growing into a larger sphere of who I am. And that has become such an important and grounding element of my existence. And like I said from the very beginning, I can accomplish a lot of things. I know that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Like they could never have thought of and connected to anything that I'm doing today, but my work, my efforts, my everything is in telling the untold stories and giving voice to the voiceless. And our ancestors had so many struggles. Um, Being on a rice plantation was the one of the top two most hazardous plantations that you could be on. Rice was right next to sugar plantations. And they were both hand in hand in the amount of dangerous elements that went into the production of those products. Rice was the type of situation where only 10% of people who were working on a rice plantation survived to the age of 40, between 40 and 50. Um, it was very dangerous because they were clearing fields with crude materials, and the cypress trees that they were clearing the fields with sometimes had a circumference of 8 feet in diameter. Um, there were a lot of deaths, there were a lot of physical injuries, and because of that, a lot of them did not make it away from the waters that they were trying to clear the trees from. There were um, um, mosquitoes and leech and snakes and alligators, all of these natural things, not to mention yellow fever and malaria, on top of the dangers that came with it. And so between that and growing indigo, which they would alternate the seasons between those two crops, indigo would get into your skin. People would have blue hands and skin where it just did not come off of their skin. And of course, they had to work with the different chemicals that went along with that. So rice plantations were extraordinarily dangerous places, and it is a tremendous, I was going to say success, but really more of an accomplishment or achievement for my ancestors and the ancestors of others to have just survived to the point where another generation can come along, and another generation and another generation. So when I think in terms of what they went through in order to have me standing here today talking to you
Right.
and telling you about their story, it swells me with pride to know that they had the fortitude to survive and make it through all of the different things that they had to accomplish. And that in itself, I mean, slavery was difficult for everybody, but when you think about some of the extraordinarily difficult things that rice enslaved people had to experience, it just elevates the level of achievement that they had. And it's so important for all of us. Some people cannot find or understand what their story is or connect it to different countries and different elements of their lineage and all of that. But what's important is whatever information that you have, that if it's shared so that collectively we can create an entire story that puzzle piece by puzzle piece can bridge all of those elements into becoming the whole story. That's what's important, because it is so hard, using that orphan analogy, it's so hard for some of us to be able to even understand or know any of our DNA or lineage, because of course there's that 1870 slave wall of, lack of information and all of the things that go into to trying to get back into the past. But collectively, if we join our stories, if we share our stories, if we elevate those stories of those voiceless people, that's what makes a difference. And part of what I do is, in addition to telling the story of my ancestors and telling the stories of those who did not get a chance to speak, I also realized very early on that I could not do my culture justice if I was not protecting the land. And the land that the Gullah have has been evaporating extraordinarily quickly. Just to give you an example, I live on Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. In 1956, before the bridge was built to the mainland, there was 3,500 acres of land that was Gullah owned. The foundation that I have, the nonprofit work that I do, we have been counting acres so that we can have a benchmark of where we are moving forward. As of 2024, the fall of 2024, that number is down to 936. And that's just Hilton Head. There are 11 states from Virginia all the way to Texas that have heirs property issues. And the land is being stripped away, it's being stolen, it is being just walked away from because of frustration. And so, because of that, it is important for us to not only know our stories, but to also preserve the areas that our stories come from. Because if we cannot keep all of that, the land is the greatest asset that our culture has. And when the land is gone, the people leave, and with the land and the people lost, there goes the culture. And that's why it's so important for all of us to not only be involved in preserving our culture to whatever degree that is and sharing our culture, but also making sure that our culture is passed on to future generations, because it's those types of elements of culture that make all of us who we are, and it makes all of us part of the greater African diaspora story. And when we're able to not only know our stories and tell our stories, it also strengthens all of the things that we can do for not only this generation, our generation, but generations into the future. So I know I covered a lot of different elements of my story, but I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
I have a very basic question. Is there a difference between Gullah and Geechee? I saw in your bio you said Gullah Geechee, but more recently I've been hearing that Gullah is from one particular area, Geechee is from another. So can you explain?
Absolutely. And that's usually the first question that I usually get. So happy to answer that. So you're right. There is some regionalness to the Gullah Geechee identification. My aunts in New York, they used to call themselves Geechee, and they were from Charleston. However, in the technical sense, the Gullah are from North Carolina and South Carolina, and the Geechee are from Georgia and Florida. But people were moved around. They were sold. They moved after the Great Scatter. So for a lot of reasons, it's a, let's call it a hazy line. So that's why when you hear people say I'm Gullah Geechee, that's to be all inclusive. So where does it come from? It has been said, and there's no right answer because there were no written records. It's all face-to-face culture. So here's the list of the different elements of it, and I believe all of this is true. So there was a Gola tribe in Africa, and there was a Gullah tribe in Africa. There is also a Kisi tribe in Africa, okay? And because the largest percentage of the people coming out of West Africa came from Angola, that is another reason. So those tend to be the derivatives of the words or the name. In Georgia, there's the Ogeechee River. And so that's why, and the Ogeechee River is very close to the South Carolina, Georgia line. So that's also part of it, that it is said that people came from Georgia and the Ogeechee. Um, a lot of Geechee had been called saltwater Geechee because they were the Geechee that were on the islands, and Gullah tended to be inland. But there are people in Charleston who call themselves Gullah. There are people in Charleston that call themselves Geechee. People say that the word Gullah represents the people. Some people say Geechee represents the people. Some people say Gullah is the language. Some people say Geechee is the language. Some people say that the Gullah is the culture and the Geechee are the people. I mean, it to me is all of those, because it's all in who you're asking and how it's interpreted. If you go to North Carolina, around the Wilmington area, they call themselves Geechee. So, there is no wrong answer, and I don't think that there's any particular answer that is 100% right. But if we all call ourselves Gullah Geechee, that covers everybody, and no one out of that list is excluded. What I will say to you is that at one point, the word Geechee was considered an insult. And when people were called Geechee, it was because they were considered country or backwards talking. And so that is why for many years, a lot of people went and did not identify themselves as a Gullah Geechee because they didn't want that moniker, let's call it, of being slow talking, ignorant sounding, all of those things. And that's also why the language was not shared in outside of the household. I mean, there are households that would speak the language, but people were raised to grow up without speaking it, because at a lot of schools, the children were either teased for speaking that way, or the teachers were actually uh, what do you call it? Disciplining children for speaking in what they would call ignorant speak. We now know that Gullah or Geechee, however you're calling the language, is a second language. And so, at least in South Carolina, there have been some efforts in trying to recognize the language as a second language, just kind of like ESOL in the classrooms, so that children have that recognition and appreciation for the fact that they do have a second language that they're speaking. So those are some of the different areas that the Gullah and the Geechee comes into play, but it can't be wrong with calling yourself either.
Ms. Luana, you're hitting very close to home to me. Ironically enough, I can sort of flip this a little. I'm a transplanted Floridian who's been in New York City for a very long time. Although on a tangent, each winter I'm reminded I'm still an old Florida country boy, but be that as it may. Um, my mother first brought me north in 1959, and that attitude that you mentioned about stuff being country is very real. I certainly was a victim of it. Certainly 50s into the 60s. If you had any kind of Southern accent, and mine wasn't as deep as my sister's was. My sister really had it rough. But yeah, you were considered country and backwards, and a lot of stuff they associated with that you didn't talk about, or else you found yourself in some really, well, from verbal abuse to when I got in high school, things actually, because some of the kids were imitating their parents, they would actually try to get physical with you. So believe me, that was very real what you're talking about, because I like to think I'm a survivor of that. But for many years, had no choice but to suppress my heritage. So I hear
And
what
a
you're
lot,
saying, Miss.
and a lot of people did exactly that, suppress their heritage, and shy away from speaking the language, teaching the language. I have a friend who grew up in a Gullah household, and her grandmother refused to speak to her in Gullah, even though she knew how to speak it, but she refused to speak it, just tell her to speak it, and encouraged her not to when she stepped out of the door. She said that at one point she went for a job interview and she was up against another woman who was Gullah and had a very strong Gullah accent and was more qualified for the position than she was, but was not hired because the assumption was that because she was speaking that way, she was not as intelligent as my friend was. And so those are some of the things that people have faced. And part of the reason why a lot of people were not sharing that they were Gullah. I mean, the beauty of things now is that, and I call it the ancestry.com world that we're in, people, especially younger people, are not only curious about who they are, but they want to learn the language. They want to learn about the culture. They want to know more about where they came from. And so that generation that was ashamed of it, essentially the next generation that could not speak it has been skipped over by the current generation that is really looking to learn more and go backwards. And so that's why I have hope, for the culture, for the continuation of the knowledge and our stories, because there is an active generation. But you're right, there was for a very, very long time a lot of people who really just refused to accept and acknowledge who they were and where they came from.
I certainly meet a lot of young people and I get emotional because I'm so proud of them. They won't take any nonsense from anybody if you try to get in their face. They will get back in your face because they are proud of who they are and the ancestors. When I was coming up, I had to be on the defensive. These young folks, these youngins now, they ain't taking that. And
Exactly.
I'm so proud of them. I
It's a
met,
beautiful thing.
it is very much so.
Hi, Luana. Am I
Yes.
saying your name right? I'm Gigi,
Yes.
Wendy's aunt. And you know what? I grew up during segregation. I was born in 1952. I went to an all-black school here in Bracketville, Carver School. And then when we went into the public school and, were integrated, some of the children did laugh at us, at our language. So, and we got over it though. We had a real good teacher at the Carver School, Miss Charles Wilson. She was one of the best English teachers. So she helped us a lot. So I really
You
do
were
see where you're
fortunate.
coming from. Yeah.
You were fortunate, but I know several people who are from around the area where I live,
Yeah.
where they would get in trouble for misspeaking, which is what they were told, and um, um, in how they were speaking, that
Yeah.
they would get disciplined for it
Wow. Yeah.
or shamed out of it.
Yes.
Hello, Miss Sellars.
Yes.
This is Eric
Luana,
Crawford.
please.
Luana, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing
I was
fine.
waiting for you to pop in there.
I couldn't resist. I was sitting there listening to, oh my Lord, she's right all over me. Something you said, I will contend that a language is really, for many students that I come in contact with, it's their first language because they have to now, when they go to school, undo what they've heard.
Yes.
So it becomes for them. I had a student who is a junior now at Claflin University, and I gave her my infamous music history paper, scholarly paper. And when she first gave me her first draft, I said to her, name is Kazari. Kazari, you copied this right off the internet. I said, read it to me. And she couldn't even read it. I said, come on, Kazari. And so we began this process. And she said, I was told that how I speak wasn't what they wanted to hear and see in print. In print. I said, well, Kazari, it has always been important how you speak. Yeah. And so it began this process of her sending me drafts. She said, Dr. Crawford, I've never worked this hard ever on a paper. She sent me this text saying, no one has ever told me that what I was speaking was important. It was a language. I think that's always critical, is that for many students that I see from the islands, it's their first language. And they have to now come in and then undo. But it's that sense of, and for them, I will always say, what the enslaved Africans came and brought here is still here. I hear it all the time, and especially in your language. And it so empowers them to know that what they're saying or speaking and hearing is actually a language.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I've learned through my work is that, I'll explain it with a little story first. When I was in school, in elementary school, there was International Day. And you had all of these kids who would come in and they had, I'm Chinese American, I'm Italian American, and I'm Irish, and, all of that, all of that. And for me, calling myself African American never made sense to me, because I was smart enough, even as a child, to say, well, that's a continent, not a country. So, where does that connect for me? And calling myself Black American didn't make sense either, because I know that's a color. But one of the things that I have started doing for myself is calling myself a Gullah Geechee American, because that's who I am. It's tangible. I can identify an area where I come from. My DNA actually says that I come from the southern coastline of the United States. So, things like that. And of course, I can connect myself to Africa, specific countries in Africa. And so to me, it is so grounding. It is so connecting to be able to not only have that association, which you may not have ever thought that you had. If I knew back then what I know today, oh my gosh, I would have had 15 Pulitzers by the time I was 20 or something like that. Because it answers so many questions for me, and it answers so many questions for other people. One of the things that I find really empowering about my work is that every day someone says thank you for the information, for the knowledge I've shared, or whatever it is. And one woman, and I don't even know who this is, and one of these days I'm going to do a post and say, if you're still out there, please find me, so I can thank her personally. But she said to me, thank you for tending the garden of my culture. And to me, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's a garden that, you know, when I was a child, it just had little buds coming out of the soil. Now it's this plant that is growing and I can see it, and it has flowers, and you know, it has all of this richness to it that continues to grow. And to me, that's what culture is. That's what learning, you know, for your student, having that confirmation of who she is and what she could be proud of. That to me is everything. And I mean, it took me all my life to get here, but it's to me something that is so valuable that it's like finding a treasure chest, and you know, you open it up and stuff is just popping out all of the time that's new and exciting and worth sharing. So to me, it's just all about culture. It's all about our culture. It's all about our traditions. It's all about our history.
I have a question.
Hi.
Hi, my name's Corina. Thank you so much for being here. So my question to you is, do you speak the language?
I am learning the language.
Okay.
I know
And
random words, but what, and I get asked this is the second question that I always get. What is the Gullah Geechee and can I speak it? And and I respect the language too much to butcher it. So one of these days I will be able to say something, you know, and it's really me. I mean, I probably could spat off something for you, but to me it's the pressure of the question, and then it just all leaves me. So 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 I try not to say anything until I really have the confidence to do it. But I am learning, and but I will also tell you that it is something that I find is really important for me to learn, because through my research, and I mentioned Caesar Ravenel, my ancestor, when he joined the Union Army, he had a Gullah accent, and I didn't have to hear him talk. He was born in 1847, but I know that he had a Gullah accent because when he went to sign up for the troops, he told them that his name was Ravenel, but they reassigned him a name, Robinell, because that's what they heard. And so many people were misinterpreted based on the language and what they were trying to say and express. But what I will tell you about the language, which I believe is absolutely ingenious, was that it is English words and African words shortened. When people got on the slave ships, they were thrown together for months, weeks at a time, either before they got on the ships, during the ship, and when they got to the mainland. And so when you had all 10 of those different countries, you had 10 different languages. Well, it was actually more than 10, but 10 different cultures, traditions, you know, and hundreds of different languages. But they needed to be able to communicate because they had that commonality of circumstance. So they came together and formed a cultural language so that they could communicate amongst themselves and talk about their enslavers in front of them so that they could code anything that they wanted to say without being understood. And so to me, that the language in itself is a form of resistance that they had, and that, to me, if I could speak it, it would be something that I would really be proud of, being able to keep that language moving forward.
And my other question is, so is there something being done to preserve the language where you're at?
There are some people who have grown up in the language and are teaching their children the language. Unfortunately, there are no formal classes on speaking it. Every once in a while, I'll come across someone who's sharing it through a class or something like that, but no true structure to it. To be honest, I think what you had sent me, Wendy, the guide that you guys had that had been put together, is really important. Um, but like I said, there's a whole generation that is really proud of the language, learning the language, and to be honest, once I posted something about the language, and several people told me, pull it off, because we don't need to share our language with outsiders, so that it is something that is ours for us to hold on to and to keep and to pass on to other generations. So there's definitely a movement out there to hold on to it, but as far as formal classes or structures, no, other than the class at Harvard that Sun is teaching.
I will say there are efforts now. This is sort of my passion now. Is it language? And so we've assembled a team of scholars. One of the good things about this culture is that it was captured or has been tried to be captured, or attempts to capture it over time, especially in the most iconic form, being the Negro spiritual. And because these were early, these were 19th century people trying to capture it, they not only captured words and so forth, but they captured also the language. And so we have assembled a team of scholars: Joel Pollack, Henry Campbell. We have Morehouse's choirs going back through these songs, and there are hundreds of these transcriptions done. And so we're going to go back and backtrace these to how the enslaved may have done it according to, and there's so much information now on the Creole ties, KRIO. And so as we're now going to use this iconic form of Negro spirituals, we'll be doing over 300 of these that will be back tracing them to how they might have been done. And we have so many variances, we have so many versions to really kind of look at and be able to give, because in the end, that simple form, that simple iconic genre of Negro spiritual is world known. Just like Kumbaya wasn't Kumbaya, it was Kamya. Anybody will tell you a Kamya is someone who's visiting, Benya is someone who's from there. And so, we're able to really go back and give these enslaved Africans their voices through their songs. And that begins a larger context or conversation with, again, structure. And so we hope to be able to begin that, having a grammatical book and those guides, especially as we have these students coming to schools. It's important that they see their own culture and their own language there.
Absolutely. And you know what I'm going to say? It sounds like a podcast. So it's time again.
It is.
Yeah, Miss Luana, can you talk about your podcast and just all the amazing guests you've had, the culture, and all the other wonderful things that have been discussed?
Absolutely. So I have a podcast. It is called the Lowcountry Gullah podcast, which is also, the website is lowcountrygullah.com. And I'm in my 4th season of doing the podcast, which means I have over 200 episodes of the podcast that I have been very, very fortunate to have some amazing guests, Eric being one of them, that have come on to share the culture. It started with what I called Gullah 101, which is the Gullah story from the very beginning. And it has just blossomed into, and to be honest, I started the podcast and it has become my writing. I used to write articles all of the time, but the podcast has become my writing now. And someone 2 weeks ago said to me, and I didn't even realize this until they said it, that there's so many different people that have come on to talk about all of the different aspects of the culture, that the podcast really has become an archive for the culture. And like I said, I just said I'm going to do a podcast. There was no rhyme or reason or specific thing that I was looking to get. But what it has become is not only a way for me to learn about elements of the culture, but for me to also share the culture and provide people with interesting connections to not only how what I call the keepers of the culture are doing their thing, like Eric, he's one of those keepers of the culture with the music and now the language that are available to share all of the different aspects of it. And Wendy has been on the podcast too, talking about the Black Seminoles. So, it's all of these things that people within the culture are sharing and educating more and more people, either who are Gullah and who are not Gullah, that are able to just take a deeper dive into understanding a culture that a lot of people just didn't know about. And that's part of what's exciting, is that there is an international interest in the culture. Not only the music, you mentioned Kumbaya being one of the songs that is well known, but also people wanting to know the language. I've gotten emails from people in Russia. I got an email from a student in Russia who is doing a dissertation on the Gullah culture and language. And I've also got an email from a guy, I think he was in Sweden, either Sweden, Finland, one of those, who was putting together indigenous language, putting together recordings, and wanted help getting something translated. So, the Gullah Geechee culture is one of those indigenous cultures that we have, and and it has that worldwide recognition, not only for the music but also for the curiosity of a culture that people are excited to learn about. And Eric, since you mentioned the Kumbaya, um, one of the things that always fascinates me about that song is that the Girl Scouts have made that one of their signature songs. So every Girl Scout learns that song, and most people know the song from the Girl Scouts. And what's ironic about the fact that the Girl Scouts got it is because Juliet Lowe, who was the founder of the Girl Scouts, well, it turns out that her father was not only an enslaver, but he was a slave broker. And so he had enslaved people all over the house. And that's how his daughter knew to pick up the song. And, you know, I mean, it's things like that that we don't know about. But Savannah is one of those slave societies where the culture was significant, and Juliet Lowe was one of those people who essentially shared what she knew, and that was Gullah.
Indeed. And I must say, your podcast is remarkable. You are one of the best.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was just a joy. I just admire, and it'd be wonderful to have, as you mentioned, archives, having access to those, because I mean, you've covered the culture so thoroughly. It'd be wonderful to be able to access that somehow.
Someone actually had even suggested not only creating some kind of archive of them, but that, and I mean, in the Trump world, who knows what's going on with the National Archives, but having the podcast submitted to the National Archives as a resource, because it is such a collection of people and information on a culture that had not been in existence. And again, I just said one day, you know, maybe I should do a podcast. And if you've ever listened from the beginning, I am totally honest in admitting the beginning was very raw, and, you know, technology wise, I was figuring it all out. I think I've gotten better over the years, but you know, and I appreciate anybody who stuck with me since the beginning, because it was raw. It was raw and rudimentary, but I think content wise, I've kind of made up for the many faux pas that I had over the years.
Luana, I really want to thank you for sharing, you know, your history. And also, I'm looking forward to watching your podcast, listening to your podcast. And we do sing Kumbaya to my children's ministry at church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's one of those songs that we all know and just didn't know what the connection to the culture was. Just
Right.
like Brer Rabbit. I mean, I'm sure everybody on here has heard of Brer Rabbit. I mean, those folk tales came out of the Gullah culture. You
Yes.
know, I mean, I have not been able to truly dig into it, but I believe, and it's not much of a stretch to believe, that Bugs Bunny was the twist on Brer Rabbit. You know,
Right.
so our culture has been around and influencing so many different elements of our lives. We just
That
don't
is so
know the
true.
connections until we discover those connections.
Yeah, that is so true.
Risk of preaching to the, I'm sorry. Well, at the risk of preaching to the converted, as a storyteller, what I sometimes do, there's actually the seminal story of how the lion got in Africa. And the trickster among many Southeastern people is Chokology, the lying rabbit. So again, there's a connection. And it's interesting. I understand many, many years ago, going back to the 40s, and I heard this third hand through some older Seminoles that used to live in the New York area. Some of the quote unquote full bloods actually had names of animals which didn't exist in the Miccosukee or Creek language, but apparently they can trace that back to our African ancestors that lived among them. Oh goodness, I'm trying to remember now. Oh yeah, the Miccosukee word for lion is Yatabache, not to be confused with Kawachobi, the panther, but Yatabache, the lion. But I just find it interesting that, you know, the trickster among many Southeastern peoples is the rabbit.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know, there are just so many different things that came out of Gullah folklore that have translated into all of the different elements of um of our society, you know,
Yeah.
and from there into the food, to the music, you know. I mean,
The
Eric
songs,
is the
everything. Yeah.
Eric is the expert on the music, which you know, he could speak to that better than I, but, you know, our culture was everywhere. It was everywhere, and it influenced so many different things, down to how a lot of people were just reared in the South. You know, all of those different elements were really real. And you know, again, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And that's the kind of thing that sharing information makes it so much more something to be proud of.
You know, Ms. Luana, I want to ask about the food. I just realized we have not talked about food, and that is probably my favorite thing about Gullah culture. Karina and I went to Beaufort in around right before Christmas in 2022, I think. And we went to the Christmas festival and they were having a rice cook-off. And I can still taste that rice to this day. I haven't tasted that even
Really?
compares to it. I almost feel bad every time I eat rice because I know it's not going to compare. But do you have an absolute favorite dish? And do you eat rice 3 times a day? That's what everybody said. We eat it 3 times a day.
I don't eat it 3 times a day, but I will tell you that growing up, my grandmother made hands down the best red rice. That's what I grew up with. And my grandmother, she just turned 100 in January. And to this day, she only has Carolina rice in her kitchen. And doesn't matter who's cooking it, who's buying it, it's got to be Carolina, because Carolina gold is the seed that our ancestors grew. So that's what she grew up with, and that's what was important. What I'll tell you is a little history of the rice is that because they were growing the rice, they were also fed the rice, and that's why they had rice 3 times a day. Um, and the wealth that is around our up and down our coast came from growing that rice. But they were only fed, the enslaved people were only fed the broken grains because the whole grains is what they could sell. So they weren't giving away the good stuff. They were giving us the crappy stuff, which happened to be the broken grains. And so that's where the daily rice came from, because they were growing it. And not only that, they would take the rice and or the broken grains and break it down even further into what we would call grits now, into rice grits. And so, you know, meals like shrimp and grits and fish and grits, you know, those were the kind of things that were staples in the house because rice was everywhere around, and that's what they were able to eat because it was the most accessible thing that they had.
And do you have a favorite dish, favorite Gullah dish?
Red rice.
Red rice.
Yes.
Red rice.
Yes, red rice. And it's funny because
Well,
I
you
don't
ready to
cook.
go back there?
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's my aunt. Let me mute her.
Oh, um, I don't cook. My daughter is the cook in the family. And so whenever I can go somewhere and someone's cooking some red rice, I'm like, hey, because that is hands down my favorite.
It was so good. I just, it was amazing. It was literally heaven on earth. And it was,
Oh, yeah.
they were just giving us the rice because it was the rice cook-off. So we were
You'll,
so spoiled.
you'll have to get some Carolina gold. I'll
Yeah,
have to send you some Carolina gold so
yeah.
you can have it. But I gave some to Amadou and he's treasuring it, like, you know, putting it on the shelf. So you're gonna have to eat it if I send it to you. That's a prerequisite to it being sent. But I'll also tell you that growing up, I was always, my mother loves the ocean. She loves what she calls moving water, So I've always been, as a child or whatever, taken to the water, wherever my mother could get me to the water. And don't get me wrong, I love the ocean, I love the beach, but what I found is that I have always been drawn to marshland, which, marshy looking savannas. And I realized once I moved from Florida here that what I thought were savannas and marshlands were actually rice fields that was drawing me to be here in South Carolina. And that was the land that I found the most beauty in. And so rice has just become such a focus for me. It's just become it. And I didn't realize as a child, when my parents would drive us south, that when I was looking at all of those marshlands driving by, that was the ancestors calling me to be here and to focus on rice.
May I ask, where in Florida did you live?
I lived in the Fort Lauderdale suburbs.
I'm originally
In
from Dania, although I was born in Tallahassee.
You were born from originally from where?
Well, Dania, which I understand now is Dania Beach, but I was actually born in Tallahassee, but I lived with my grandmother in Dania.
Okay. Well, I used to work in Hollywood, and I
Okay.
lived in Sunrise and Plantation, Florida. So
Okay.
I was there before I moved up here.
Also, I'm very embarrassed. I've got four types of rice in my kitchen right now, none of them Carolina Gold. So I'm going to make up for that deficiency as soon as I can.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I have been very fortunate in is that the time that I went to Georgetown, which by the way was the largest grower of rice in the country at one point. They had more than 150 rice plantations in the county. And when I went there, I didn't realize that um, not only was this where my ancestors were, but also where I have found the most comfort in being. And I was driving up there once, and the the feeling that I got as I drove up there, and I'd been up there before, but this time I had this sense of going home. And I didn't know why I felt that way until I actually got there and realized that I was home in Georgetown, that is where my ancestors were from.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I don't have a question. This is Jerry.
Hey, Jerry.
Hi. But I want to say that the story about Burr Rabbit brings back memories. In Mexico, my grandmother, under a moonlit sky, she set all the kids down, and she started telling the stories about Burr Rabbit. This was back in the early 60s. And I always wondered where she got those stories from, because she had nothing written down. She just knew all the stories. And we were just there laughing, and it was just such a wonderful time. But as a kid, I could never find those books about Burr Rabbit. So it's interesting to know that, it probably wasn't written for a long time. So just good memories about Burr Rabbit, Burr Rabbit stories.
What was her name, if I could ask?
Nellie Faye.
Nellie.
Nellie.
Faye, yes.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
She was my grandmother.
Oh my gosh. I think she's talked about in the book from Amok, Shirley Amok.
She was interviewed one time,
Right.
back in the 60s or something.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I think we're going to start winding it down unless anyone else has any other questions or anything. Or comments.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to come on and tell my story.
Oh, no, thank you very much. And what did Miss Ann say? Oh, y'all have a lot of folks named Nellie Faye. Yeah.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about the other day, is how often names get repeated. And, you know, you want to keep a name going. Like something interesting that something that I think is interesting is the name Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
In Carolina, but it got, I guess, shortened down to Kelina, so Kelina. And it's typically a name for a man, so Kelina might be someone's first name, but it literally is from Carolina. And one of my brothers, his nickname is Kelly, so it's gotten shortened even shorter to Kelly. Now his name is Caesar Kelly Daniels. And whenever my other brothers and I wanted to antagonize him, we would call him Kelina. And we had no idea where that name came from for the longest time. We just would call him Kelina. He didn't know why he got mad. He just didn't like it. We knew it made him mad, so we would call him that. But it's from Carolina. So we definitely have our Carolina roots throughout our naming system, within the Black Seminoles.
I have one comment at the risk of being shameless and self-serving. Every time y'all start talking about food on these forums, you start making my stomach growl and I start drooling on the screen. So quit embarrassing me, please. And tonight didn't help at all. I'm just saying, cuz I'm just saying.
So I figured you were good, Lonnie.
I'm gonna go cook some rice when you get off of here. Probably not as good as all.
Yeah, if you have a good rice recipe, please share it. Well, everybody, I just want to say thank you, especially Miss Luana. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. I knew it was going to be
thank you.
And I didn't realize how personal it was going to be, just how beautifully personal. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I find my work is personal, and that's what motivates me, because it's not only my story, but it's also everybody's story. So it's just an important one to make sure that's being told.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to be here, and nice to meet everybody.
And I'll send out links to everybody to the past. Please go and listen. It's amazing. And yeah, thank you. And we'll see you here next month. All right.
Okay. Take care.
Y'all take
care. Good night.
Peace.